The gate did not open slowly. It slammed upward with a metal shriek, and the light that poured in was so bright that Kessa Voss had to raise her arm before she even understood where she was standing. The ground beneath her boots was not the deck of her shuttle. It was packed dust, orange and coarse, and it stretched out into a massive round space, surrounded by walls of dark stone that rose higher than any building she had ever seen. Thousands of eyes were already on her. She could feel them before she could see them, a pressure on her skin, like heat from a fire. Someone shoved her from behind, hard, and she stumbled forward onto the open floor. Behind her, the gate slammed shut again, with a sound of finality that she felt in her chest. There was no going back the way she came. She turned in a slow circle, trying to make sense of the shapes filling the stands above her. They were not human. Most stood taller than any person she had ever met, with skin the color of dried clay, and eyes that caught the light strangely, like an animal at night. They were shouting, though the sound did not form words she understood. It formed something else. Excitement. Hunger. Kessa's mind raced backward, trying to find the last clear memory she had. A shuttle. A warning light flashing red across the console. A violent shudder, as something outside tore through her ship's hull, faster than she could react. After that, there was only darkness, and then waking up in a cell with cold metal walls and a single narrow cot, her flight suit gone, replaced with a rough gray garment that did not fit right. The only thing they had left her was the thin chain around her neck, and the 2 metal tags hanging from it. She had reached for them instinctively more than once since waking, the way a person touches a scar to make sure it is real. Now there was no time to think about any of that. Across the wide arena, another gate was opening, and something was walking out of it. The creature was broader than a man, its skin plated in overlapping ridges that looked more like armor than flesh. It moved on 2 legs, but its arms were too long, ending in hands with more fingers than they should have had. It did not look nervous. It did not look uncertain. It looked like it had done this before, many times, and had never once needed to worry about the outcome. Kessa felt her heartbeat climb into her throat. She had no weapon. She had no idea what the rules were, if there were any rules at all. She scanned the ground around her out of pure instinct, the same instinct that had kept her alive through 2 tours before this one, and she saw nothing except dust and a scattering of loose stone near the base of the nearest wall. The crowd's noise rose sharply, and she understood without needing a translator that the match had begun. The creature came at her fast, faster than something its size should have been able to move, and Kessa threw herself sideways, rolling hard across the packed dirt. She felt the rush of air where she had been standing a second before. Her shoulder screamed in protest as she came up onto her feet again, already moving, already thinking. She was not going to win this by matching strength. She had never been the strongest person in any room she had walked into. She had survived by being the one who noticed things other people missed. She noticed, for example, that the arena floor was not flat. There was a slight rise near the far wall, and beneath it, a shadowed gap, where stone met stone imperfectly. She noticed that her opponent's long arms, while powerful, were slower to change direction than to strike forward. She noticed that it favored one side slightly, the way a person favors a leg that has been injured before. She ran. Not away, but toward the rise, forcing the creature to change course and follow her. It did, and its movement lost some of its terrible smoothness as it adjusted. She reached the gap in the stone just as it closed the distance again, and she dropped low, sliding through the narrow space between 2 slabs of rock. It was barely wide enough for her body. The creature's clawed hand swiped through empty air above her, missing by the width of a hand. For one heartbeat, she was hidden. She used it. Loose stones littered the ground beneath the rise, and she grabbed the largest one she could close her fist around. When the creature bent down, trying to reach into the gap after her, she swung the stone as hard as she could into the side of its head, right where the plated ridges gave way to softer skin near its ear. It roared, stumbling back, and Kessa scrambled out from beneath the rise before it could recover. The crowd's noise had changed. It was no longer a single wave of sound. It had fractured into something more complicated, something with surprise woven through it. She did not stop moving. She circled, keeping the rise between herself and the creature, forcing it to choose between chasing her around the obstacle or coming through the gap again, which it clearly did not want to risk twice. It roared again, and charged around the side instead. And this time Kessa was ready. She had used the seconds it took to recover to find a second stone, larger than the first, wedged into the dirt near the base of the wall. When it came around the rise, she was already swinging. The impact staggered it sideways, and for the first time since the gate had opened, Kessa saw something in its posture that had not been there before. Hesitation. It backed up a step, shaking its head, and looked at her the way a person looks at something they had badly misjudged. She did not know how long the match was supposed to last, or what the rules were for it ending. She only knew that she was still standing, and that the creature across from her was no longer certain it was going to win. She kept the stone in her hand, and kept her eyes on its arms, waiting to see which direction it would move next, refusing to let herself think about anything except the next 5 seconds. Above her, the crowd had gone almost silent, and in that silence, she could hear her own breathing, ragged and fast, and beneath it, faint but steady, the small sound of the metal tags swinging against her collarbone with every movement she made. The creature did not charge again. Instead, a horn sounded somewhere high above the arena, a long, low note that cut through everything else, and the creature immediately backed away, dropping its stance, turning toward a gate on its side of the arena that was already grinding open to receive it. Kessa stood frozen, stone still raised, waiting for a trick, waiting for the fight to resume. It did not. The creature disappeared through its gate, without looking back at her again. She was alone in the center of the arena, dust settling around her boots, thousands of alien eyes still fixed on her from every direction. She had no idea what had just happened, whether she had won, whether this was some kind of pause before something worse, or whether she was expected to do something now that the fighting had stopped. Her legs were shaking, though she had not noticed it happening. Her hands would not fully unclench from around the stone. A second gate opened behind her, smaller than the ones the creatures had used, and 2 figures walked out. They were the same species as the crowd, tall and clay-skinned, but dressed differently, in dark-fitted clothing that looked almost like a uniform. They approached her without any visible hesitation, and one of them raised a small device toward her, aiming it somewhere near her chest. Kessa's instinct was to step back, to raise the stone again, but something in the way they moved told her that this was not another attack. There was no urgency in it. It felt procedural, the way a soldier checks a piece of equipment after a mission, rather than the way a person approaches danger. The device made a soft sound, and the figure holding it glanced down at a small screen, then looked up at Kessa's face with an expression she could not read. It said something to the other figure in a language full of hard consonants, and the second figure leaned in to look at the screen as well. Their posture changed. Whatever they were seeing, it mattered to them in a way the fight itself apparently had not. Kessa's hand drifted upward, almost without her permission, and closed around the 2 metal tags still hanging against her chest. They had scanned something, not her face, not her weapon, since she had none. The device had been pointed at the tags the entire time. She did not know what was stamped into that metal that could make 2 armed strangers go quiet and still after a match that had nearly gotten her killed. But she understood, in that moment, standing alone in the center of a silent arena, that whatever was coming next was not going to be simple. The fight had been the easy part. She just did not know that yet. The 2 figures did not take the tags from her. They did not try to touch them at all. Instead, one of them spoke into a small device on his wrist, low and urgent, and within moments, a third figure appeared through the same small gate, older than the other 2, moving with the kind of unhurried authority that told Kessa, immediately, that this one held more power than the others. He stopped a few paces away from her and studied her for a long moment, his strange eyes moving from her face down to the tags and back again. He did not smile. She was not even sure his kind of face was built for smiling. But something in his posture eased slightly, the tension of a predator sizing up unfamiliar prey giving way to something closer to careful curiosity. He said a word, just one, in a low voice, and though Kessa did not understand the language, she understood the weight of it. It was not a word spoken to an enemy. It was not a word spoken to livestock either. It was something else entirely. Something that made the 2 younger figures beside him straighten and step back half a pace, as if reconsidering everything they had assumed about her only minutes before. Kessa stood there in the settling dust, exhausted, bruised, and utterly confused, with no way of knowing that the two pieces of metal around her neck, the ones she had barely thought about since the day they were issued to her, were about to change everything about what she was to these people, and what she might become. They did not return Kessa to the cell she had woken up in. Instead, the older figure, the one whose single word had changed the mood of everyone around her, led her through a different corridor, one lined with dim lights and narrow doors that seemed to belong to a different world than the arena itself. She walked with her wrists unbound, which surprised her more than anything else that had happened so far. Nobody had explained why. Nobody had explained anything. The room they brought her to was small, but clean, with a real bed instead of a cot, and a tray of food waiting on a low table. Kessa eyed it with suspicion for a long moment, before her body's exhaustion overruled her caution. She ate slowly, watching the door, half expecting it to open again with more violence behind it. It did not. Hours passed, and nothing happened except the quiet hum of a ship, or a station, moving somewhere far beneath her feet. She learned his name the next day, Draven. He came alone this time, without the two younger figures, and he set a small flat device on the table between them that projected shifting symbols into the air. After a moment of adjustment, words began to form in careful, halting English, translated by whatever technology powered the device. "You fought well," the device said, in a flat mechanical tone that did not match the low rumble of Draven's actual voice. "Better than expected." Kessa did not answer right away. She studied him instead, the ridges along his jaw, the deep-set eyes that missed nothing. "Where am I?" she finally said. "A place called the Circuit," the translation offered. "You are not the first of your kind to stand in it. You will not be the last, unless something changes." "Am I a prisoner?" Draven considered the question longer than she expected. "You are property, by the laws that brought you here," he said, "but property does not usually earn a private room and a second conversation instead of a second match within a day. You understand that this is unusual." Kessa's hand found the tags at her collarbone again, an old habit resurfacing without her permission. Draven's eyes followed the movement, and something in his posture sharpened. "That is why," he said simply. "May I see them?" She hesitated only a moment before lifting the chain over her head and setting it on the table between them, though she kept her fingers resting near it, unwilling to let it out of reach entirely. Draven did not touch the tags either. He simply looked at them for a long time, longer than made sense for two small pieces of stamped metal. "Do you know what these mean?" he asked. "Their identification," Kessa said. "Every soldier where I come from wears something like them. Name, number, blood type, in case something happens to us, and someone needs to know who we were." "There is a symbol stamped beside your name," Draven said. "A small mark, easy to overlook. Your kind may not even remember what it means anymore. Mine does." Kessa leaned forward slightly, studying the tag as if seeing it for the first time. She had never paid much attention to the small emblem near her unit number, a circular shape with 3 lines crossing through it. She had always assumed it was simply her division's insignia, something assigned to her company before she had even joined. "It is old," Draven continued. "Older than the empire that built this arena. It belongs to an alliance my people broke faith with generations ago, one many among us would prefer to forget ever existed. I did not expect to see it again in my lifetime, and certainly not around the neck of a captive thrown into the circuit by mistake." "By mistake," Kessa repeated. "You're telling me all of this was a mistake?" "I am telling you that whoever captured your shuttle did not know what they had found," Draven said. "And now that I know, I am uncertain what to do with that knowledge. There are those above me who would see this as an opportunity. There are others who would see it as a danger to be erased quietly before it becomes a problem." The word erased sat heavily in the small room. Kessa kept her expression steady, though her pulse had picked up again. The same sharp alertness that had carried her through the arena, now turning inward, toward this new and less visible threat.
"So what happens to me now?" she asked.
"For now, nothing," Draven said. "You will fight again. It would draw too much attention to remove you from the circuit suddenly, and attention is the last thing either of us wants until I understand more. But you should know that every match you win from this point forward is being watched more closely than you realize. Not for entertainment. For confirmation. Confirmation of what? Draven did not answer that question directly. He rose instead, collecting the small translation device, though he left the tags where they lay on the table. A small and deliberate gesture of trust that Kessa noted carefully. Rest while you can, he said. Your next match is in 2 days. Fight the way you fought before, and do not mention what we have discussed to anyone else in this place. Not the guards, not the other captives, no one. Do you understand? I understand that I still don't know what I've gotten caught up in, Kessa said. Neither do I. Entirely, Draven admitted, and for the first time since she had met him, something in his tone sounded almost human. But I intend to find out before it is decided for us both. 2 days passed slower than any 2 days Kessa could remember. She used the time to move through the small room, stretching muscles that still ached from the fight, running through drills from memory, trying to keep her body ready for whatever came next. She thought often about the symbol on her tag, wondering how something stamped into a piece of metal she had worn, without a second thought for years, could possibly matter this much to a species she had not known existed until a few days earlier. When the guards came for her second match, she recognized one of them as the younger figure from her first day, the one who had first aimed the scanning device at her chest. He did not look at her the way he had before, with the flat detachment of someone handling cargo. There was something closer to wariness in his eyes now, and Kessa filed that away as useful information. The arena looked the same as before, the same wide floor of packed orange dust, the same towering stands full of restless eyes. But something felt different this time, a charge in the air that had not been there during her first match. She wondered if word had already spread about what had happened after her first fight, whether the crowd somehow sensed that this match carried more weight than the last. Her opponent this time was smaller than the first creature but faster, built low to the ground with limbs that moved in quick, unpredictable bursts. It did not charge the way the first one had. It circled her instead, testing her reactions, darting in and pulling back before she could land a solid response. Kessa forced herself to slow her breathing, to watch instead of react. She thought of everything Draven had said, about attention and confirmation, and understood without needing it spelled out that losing this match, or even fighting poorly, might be more dangerous now than it had been 2 days ago. Whatever conclusion the people watching her were trying to reach, she needed to control what evidence she gave them. The creature darted in again, and this time Kessa was ready, pivoting on her back foot and catching its shoulder with a hard strike that sent it stumbling wide. It recovered quickly, faster than she expected, and came back at her from a new angle, forcing her to react instead of plan. She took a glancing hit along her ribs that stole the air from her lungs for a moment, and the crowd's noise surged at the sight of her staggering. She refused to go down. She planted her feet, absorbed the pain, and used the creature's own momentum against it, as it came in for a follow-up strike, redirecting its weight and sending it sprawling across the dust. It rolled back up quickly, but the brief opening was enough. Kessa closed the distance before it could reset its stance, driving it back toward the edge of the arena floor with a series of controlled strikes that gave it no room to find its rhythm again. The horn sounded before either of them could land a finishing blow, the same long, low note from her first match, and both combatants froze, chests heaving, waiting for what came next. The creature backed away toward its gate without hesitation, the same way the first one had, and Kessa was left standing again in the center of the arena, breathing hard, blood trickling from a shallow cut along her ribs where the earlier strike had connected. This time, the crowd's reaction was different from the first match. It was not confused silence giving way to noise. It was something closer to a low, rolling murmur that spread through the stands like wind through a field, thousands of voices reacting to something Kessa could not see or understand, but could absolutely feel. She looked up toward one of the higher platforms overlooking the arena floor, and for just a moment, she thought she saw Draven standing there, among a cluster of other figures, dressed even more elaborately than he was. He was too far away for her to read his expression clearly, but his posture told her enough. He was not watching her the way the crowd watched her. He was watching the crowd watch her, and whatever he saw in their reaction was not making him relax. The guards came for her again once the gate closed behind her, and this time they moved with more visible caution than before, as if handling something they were no longer entirely sure they understood. She was brought back to the same small room, the tray of food already waiting. But sleep did not come easily that night. She lay awake, replaying Draven's words in her mind, the warning underneath his careful phrasing. Confirmation of what? She still did not have an answer, but she understood now, with a clarity that settled cold and heavy in her chest, that the answer mattered more to the people around her than her own survival did, and that whatever it turned out to be, it was already too late to stop it from unfolding. 3 more days passed before Draven returned, and when he did, he was not alone. Beside him stood a woman of his own kind, older still, her clay-colored skin marked with faint lines that Kessa guessed were some form of age or rank, though she had no way to be certain. The woman's eyes moved over Kessa with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under glass rather than a person in a room. "This is Nail," Draven said, once the translation device had been set between them. "She keeps the old records. What I told you about the symbol on your tag was only the smallest part of what she found, once I brought it to her attention." Nail did not waste time with pleasantries. She set a thin, worn tablet on the table, its surface displaying faded symbols that looked hand-carved rather than printed. Images copied from something far older than any of the technology Kessa had seen since arriving. 300 years ago, by your measure of time, there was a faction among my people who broke from the empire that rules the circuit today, Nail said, her words arriving through the translator in a careful, measured rhythm. They believed our species had grown cruel, that conquest and spectacle had replaced everything that once gave our culture meaning. They were called the Calvex, and they did not simply protest. They fought a war over it, and they lost. "What does that have to do with me?" Kessa asked, though some part of her had already begun to suspect the shape of the answer. "Before their defeat, the Calvex made contact with a species from a distant system," Nail continued. "A species that had not yet mastered travel between stars, but who shared enough of their values that an alliance was formed, a pact. Symbols like the one on your tag were given to those who honored that alliance, a mark of shared purpose between two peoples who believed war should never be treated as entertainment." Kessa felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You're saying my ancestors made some kind of agreement with your ancestors, 300 years ago, and I'm just now finding out about it because of a tag I've worn since basic training." "I am saying that symbol should not exist anymore," Nail said. "The Calvex were destroyed. Their records were burned. Their allies, wherever they were, should have had no reason to remember a promise made to a faction that no longer exists. And yet here it sits, stamped into metal, carried across the stars by someone who did not even know its meaning, and who happened to fall into the one place in this empire where its meaning could still be recognized." Draven leaned forward. "Do you understand now why this matters? If word of this reaches the wrong ears, some will see it as proof that the old alliance never truly died, that it merely went into hiding, waiting to resurface. Others will see it as a threat to the current order, evidence that the descendants of a defeated rebellion are still out there, still connected to outside power. Neither reaction is safe for you." Kessa sat back, trying to absorb everything at once. It felt impossible. The idea that a piece of metal she had barely thought twice about could carry this much weight, that her being thrown into this arena by accident could somehow connect to a conflict that had happened long before she was born, on a world she had never heard of, among people she had not known existed a week earlier. "So what do I do?" she asked quietly. "You said some people would want to use this. Others would want to erase it. Where does that leave me?" Nail and Draven exchanged a look that Kessa could not fully read, but she understood enough of it to know that they did not have a simple answer for her either. "For now, it leaves you in the circuit," Draven said. "Fighting, surviving, drawing more attention with every match you win. I had hoped to keep this quiet until we understood more, but that hope grew thinner the moment the crowd began reacting the way they did during your last match. They are creatures of instinct as much as any of us. Some of them felt something in that arena they could not explain, and word of a strange feeling travels faster than any of us would like. As if summoned by the conversation itself, a soft chime sounded from the device on Draven's wrist, and his expression shifted the moment he read whatever message had arrived. He exchanged a rapid series of words with Nail in their own language, low and clipped, and Kessa caught the tension in both of their postures, even without understanding a syllable of what was being said. "What?" she demanded. "What's happening?" Draven turned back to her, his expression carefully neutral in a way that told her he was working hard to keep it that way. "You have been summoned," he said. "Not to the arena, to a private audience, with one of the circuit's overseers, a member of the ruling council who has taken a personal interest in your recent matches." "Is that bad?" "It depends entirely on what he intends to do with that interest," Draven said. "His name is Voss." The word landed strangely in the small room, and Kessa felt her breath catch before she could stop it. "That's my last name," she said. "Voss. That's my family name." Nail's eyes sharpened with a new intensity, and even Draven, who had seemed steady through everything else, went still for a long moment. "That cannot be a coincidence," Nail said slowly. "Names among my people carry meaning, tied to lineage and old alliances. If your family name matches a name still spoken within the ruling structure of this empire, then the thread connecting you to the old pact runs deeper than either of us suspected." "Or it's exactly what it sounds like," Kessa said, though her voice did not carry the confidence she wanted it to. "A coincidence, a word that sounds alike in two different languages that have nothing to do with each other." "Perhaps," Draven said, "but I would not wager your safety on that possibility, and neither should you." The summons could not be refused, or at least none of them suggested that it could. Kessa was given clothing more formal than the rough garment she had been wearing since her capture, a dark-fitted outfit that Draven explained was meant to show respect without disguising what she was. She was led not through the tunnels toward the arena floor, but upward, through corridors that grew steadily more polished and ornate, until she found herself standing before a set of tall doors carved with the same three-lined circular symbol that sat on her dog tag, rendered here in gold, and easily the height of two people. The doors opened without anyone visibly touching them, and Kessa stepped through into a wide chamber with a high ceiling and a single figure seated at its far end, watching her approach with an expression she could not begin to interpret. He was older than Draven, his clay-colored skin deeply lined, his posture radiating an authority that needed no translation to understand. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, and the translation device Draven had given Kessa to wear for the meeting rendered his words into careful, precise English. "You wear a name I have not heard spoken in a very long time," he said, without any greeting or preamble. "Voss, tell me where it comes from." "It's my family's name," Kessa said, keeping her voice level, despite the pounding of her own pulse. "Passed down for generations. I don't know its origin beyond that. I never had a reason to ask." "Interesting," the overseer said, his eyes narrowing slightly, "because 300 years ago, among the records of the Calvex faction that my ancestors helped destroy, there was a name recorded as the leader of the outside alliance they had formed. A name that, when translated across the distance between our languages, would sound very much like the one you carry now." Kessa's throat went dry. "I don't understand what you're suggesting." "I am suggesting," the overseer said, rising slowly from his seat, "that either an extraordinary coincidence has placed you in my arena, or the bloodline my ancestors believed they had erased from history has resurfaced, wearing a symbol they thought lost forever, at the exact moment my hold over this council is being questioned by those who would prefer a weaker leader in my place." He began to circle her slowly, and Kessa forced herself to stand still, refusing to let him see how deeply his words had unsettled her. "You must understand my position," he continued. "If I declare you a relic of the old alliance, a symbol returned to challenge the order my family fought to build, there are those who will use that declaration as an excuse to move against me, claiming I have grown weak, that I see ghosts in captives who mean nothing at all. If I declare you meaningless, a curious coincidence, and nothing more, and it is later proven otherwise, I will be seen as a fool who let the last thread of the old rebellion slip through his hands without recognizing it. So either way, I'm dangerous to you," Kessa said quietly. "Either way, you are dangerous to me," he agreed, "which is why, for now, I intend to do neither. You will continue fighting in the circuit, publicly, visibly, until I decide which story serves me best. Fight well, human, because your survival and my patience are, for the moment, tied to the same outcome." He returned to his seat, and Kessa understood without being told that the audience had ended. Draven appeared at her side almost instantly, guiding her back through the tall doors and down through the polished corridors. his expression grim, in a way that told her everything she needed to know about how badly this had gone, even without the details spelled out. "He's going to use me," Kessa said once they were far enough from the chamber to speak freely. "Whatever happens next, whichever way this goes, he's going to use whatever I am to protect his own position." "Yes," Draven admitted. "And there are others on his council who would happily see you removed entirely, rather than risk him gaining that advantage. You are no longer simply a captive who fights well in the circuit, Kessa. You are a piece on a board far larger than either of us expected, and every match from this point forward will be watched by people deciding whether you are worth more to them alive or gone." Kessa closed her hand around the tags at her collarbone, feeling the small raised symbol beneath her fingers, the one that had followed her family for generations, without anyone ever explaining why it mattered. She had come into this place expecting to fight for her life against creatures twice her size. She had not expected to find herself standing at the center of a conflict 300 years older than she was, holding a piece of history she had never asked to carry, with no clear path back to the life she had known before any of this began. "Then I need to know everything," she said. "Everything about the Calvex, everything about this alliance, everything that name meant before it ended up stamped on a piece of metal around my neck. If I'm going to survive whatever's coming, I can't do it blind." Draven studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his careful expression. "Then we had better move quickly," he said, "because I do not believe the Overseer intends to wait very long before making his decision." Over the following days, Nail became a constant presence in Kessa's small room, arriving with worn tablets and fragments of records that had survived 300 years of deliberate erasure. Piece by piece, the story of the Calvex took shape, no longer a vague warning from Draven, but something Kessa could almost see, almost feel, as if the past had been waiting patiently for someone to finally listen. The Calvex had not started as rebels. They had started as a faction within the Empire, who believed that the endless matches of the circuit, the practice of throwing captured peoples into arenas for entertainment, had corrupted something essential about their culture. They argued for reform, not revolution, hoping to change the Empire from within. It was only when their calls were ignored, and then punished, that they broke away entirely, forming their own settlements on the Empire's outer edge. It was there, isolated and searching for allies against a much larger power, that they had first made contact with a species from a distant system, one still generations away from mastering travel between stars, but resourceful and disciplined in ways the Calvex respected deeply. The alliance that formed was small, mostly symbolic at first, an exchange of knowledge, and a promise of mutual protection should either side ever need it. The three-line symbol had been created together, representing both peoples, bound by a single shared purpose. The Empire had not tolerated the arrangement for long. Fearing that outside power might strengthen the rebellion beyond their ability to control it, they moved against the Calvex before the alliance could mature into anything more substantial. The war that followed was brutal and short. The Calvex were overwhelmed, their settlements destroyed, their records burned, their name erased from official history so thoroughly that most living members of the Empire had never even heard it spoken. "But not everyone died," Kessa said, studying the fragments Nail had gathered. "Someone survived. Someone got that symbol off this world and back to mine." "It seems so," Nail agreed. "Whether it was a single survivor who reached your ancestors before the war ended, or some other path we have not yet uncovered, I cannot say for certain. But the fact remains that your family carried this mark forward for 300 years without ever knowing why, which tells me the connection was protected carefully, deliberately, by someone who understood exactly how dangerous that knowledge could become." Kessa thought of her grandfather, a quiet man who had never spoken much about where the family name came from, only that it was old, and that it mattered to keep it. She had always assumed that was simply pride, the kind every family carried about its own history. She had never imagined it might be something closer to a warning passed down in silence, generation after generation, waiting for someone to finally need it. Her fourth match in the circuit came sooner than she wanted, and this time, when the gate opened, she understood immediately that something had changed. The crowd's noise, once wild and unpredictable, had settled into something quieter, more expectant, as if they were no longer watching a captive fight for survival, but waiting to see whether a story they had heard whispered somewhere would prove true. Her opponent this time was not a single creature. It was two, working together with a coordination that told her immediately this fight had been arranged differently than the ones before it. Kessa's stomach dropped as she realized what this meant. Someone, likely on the Overseer's Council, had decided to test her further, or perhaps simply decided that ending things quickly would be easier than continuing to wait for a decision that never seemed to come. She fought harder than she had in either of her previous matches, forced to track two opponents at once, using the arena's uneven terrain the way she had before, refusing to let either creature pin her into a position where both could strike at the same time. It was close, closer than anything she had faced yet, and by the time the horn finally sounded, she was bleeding from a cut along her forearm and barely able to keep her footing beneath her. But she was still standing, and both of her opponents were not. The crowd's reaction this time was unlike anything she had heard before, a sound that rose and rose until it felt like the walls themselves might shake apart from it. Kessa stood in the center of the arena, chest heaving, blood running down her arm, and understood, without needing to be told, that whatever quiet game had been playing out around her had just become significantly louder. Draven found her before the guards could return her to her room, pulling her aside into a narrow corridor with an urgency she had not seen from him before. "There has been a development," he said, his translation device barely keeping pace with the speed of his words. "The Overseer's rivals on the council have learned of your last audience with him. They believe he intends to use your bloodline to strengthen his position, to claim legitimacy through an old alliance that predates the current order entirely. They do not intend to let that happen quietly." "What does that mean for me?" Kessa asked, pressing a hand against the cut on her arm. "It means there are those who will try to have you removed from the circuit permanently before the Overseer can decide how to use you," Draven said. "Not through the arena. Through something quieter, something that would look like an accident, or a simple failure of your body under the strain of repeated matches. I have reason to believe such a plan is already being arranged." Kessa felt a cold certainty settle over her, the same clarity that had carried her through every match so far. "Then I need to get ahead of it," she said. "Whatever they're planning, whatever quiet solution they've decided on, I can't just wait for it to happen to me." "There is little you can do from inside a holding room," Draven said. "But there may be another path. The Overseer has not yet made his declaration. If he could be convinced to make it publicly, immediately, before his rivals have the chance to act, it would remove the advantage of secrecy from anyone hoping to have you quietly removed. A public claim cannot be undone as easily as a private one. And if he refuses, if he decides waiting, still serves him better. Then we find another way to make the truth public ourselves," Draven said, and something in his tone told Kessa this was not a suggestion he made lightly. Nail has spent years protecting the fragments of Calvek's history that survived the Purge. She has never had a reason strong enough to risk revealing them. I believe she may finally have found one. That night, sleep did not come at all. Kessa lay awake, turning over every version of what might happen next, weighing the risk of trusting Draven and Nail against the risk of trusting no one at all, in a place where she understood almost nothing about the rules that governed her survival. She thought about her grandfather again, about the quiet weight he had carried without explanation, and wondered whether he would have recognized any of this, whether some part of him had always known his family's history might one day matter far more than anyone believed. Near dawn, by whatever measurement of time the station kept, Draven returned with news that confirmed her worst fears. The Overseer's rivals had moved faster than expected. A formal challenge had been issued, not through the quiet channels Draven had feared, but openly, publicly, framed as a final match meant to settle the question of Kessa's significance once and for all. If she won, the Overseer would be forced to acknowledge the old alliance publicly, exactly as he had feared. If she lost, or worse, if she did not survive the match at all, the entire question would be resolved in the simplest way possible, with no need for anyone to explain anything to anyone. "They have chosen your opponent already," Draven said grimly. "Not a beast, bred for the arena. A warrior, one of their own, trained specifically to ensure the outcome falls in their favor. This is no longer a test, Kessa. This is an execution dressed up as a match, and it has been scheduled for tomorrow." Kessa closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe through the wave of fear that threatened to rise up and take hold of her thinking. She had survived 3 matches, through skill and instinct, through refusing to let herself be predictable. But a trained warrior, sent specifically to end this, was a different kind of danger entirely. One she was not certain skill alone would be enough to overcome. "Then we don't just prepare me to fight," she said finally, opening her eyes. "We prepare everyone in that crowd to understand exactly what they're watching before it happens. If this is going to be decided in front of thousands of people anyway, then let's make sure the truth is standing in that arena right alongside me." Draven studied her for a long moment, and for the first time since they had met, something that looked almost like hope crossed his careful expression. "That," he said slowly, "may be the only plan with any real chance of working." The morning of the final match arrived faster than Kessa felt ready for, though she suspected no amount of time would have felt like enough. Draven came to her room early, carrying not the rough garment she had worn for her previous fights, but something closer to ceremonial armor, dark and fitted, etched along one shoulder with the same 3-lined symbol that had started all of this. "Nail made this overnight," he explained, helping her into it despite her surprise. "If you are going to stand in that arena today, you will not stand in it looking like ordinary property. You will stand in it looking like exactly what that symbol claims you are. And if that makes things worse instead of better," Kessa said, "if it just makes me look like I'm claiming something I have no right to claim, then at least you will have made the claim honestly, in the open, where everyone can see it," Draven said, "which is more than the people trying to have you quietly removed can say about their own intentions." Nail was waiting near the tunnel that led out onto the arena floor, along with a small device Kessa had not seen before. One she explained would broadcast a recorded message across the arena's sound system the moment the match began, cutting through the usual noise of the crowd with a translated account of the Calvex, the Old Alliance, and the symbol Kessa now wore openly on her shoulder. It was a risk, all of them understood that. If it failed, if the crowd reacted with hostility, instead of the reconsideration they were hoping for, there would be no way to undo it, once the words had already been spoken. "There is no guarantee this changes anything," Nail admitted. "The Empire has spent 300 years teaching its people that the Calvex were nothing but traitors, who deserved what came to them. A recording will not undo 300 years of a story told one way." "Maybe not," Kessa said, tightening the last strap of the armor with steady hands. "But it's the truth, and truth has a way of being harder to ignore once it's standing right in front of you." The gate opened, and this time Kessa did not stumble forward the way she had on that very first day. She walked out onto the arena floor with her head level, the dark armor catching the light, the symbol on her shoulder visible to every eye in the towering stands above her. The crowd's reaction was immediate, a wave of murmurs and shifting bodies, as thousands of alien eyes took in the sight of her, dressed no longer as captured prey, but as something else entirely. Her opponent was already waiting near the center of the floor, tall and lean, moving with the precise, economical grace of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of confrontation for a very long time. There was no hesitation in his stance, no uncertainty in the way he studied her across the open ground. He had been sent to end this, and everything about him said he intended to do exactly that. The horn sounded, sharper and shorter than she remembered from her previous matches, and a moment later, Nail's recorded message began playing across the arena's sound system, her translated words rolling out over the crowd, even as the warrior across from Kessa closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. Kessa barely had time to register the first line of the broadcast before she was forced to react, twisting aside from a strike that would have ended the match in its first second had it landed. She fell back on everything she had learned in 3 previous fights, using the terrain, using misdirection, refusing to let herself be caught in a straight exchange of force against someone clearly stronger and faster than she was. But this opponent did not make the mistakes the arena beasts had made. He anticipated her movement toward the rise near the far wall and cut her off before she could reach it, forcing her back into open ground where she had no advantage at all. Above the noise of the fight, Nail's broadcast continued, the story of the Calvex unfolding across the arena even as Kessa fought for her life beneath it. She caught fragments of it between exchanges, the mention of the old pact, the description of the Alliance's true purpose, the acknowledgement that the Empire's official history had buried a truth deliberately for 300 years. The crowd's noise shifted with every new revelation, confusion giving way to something more volatile. voices rising in argument with each other, rather than simply cheering for violence below. The warrior pressed his advantage, driving Kessa backward with a series of strikes she could only partially deflect, each one costing her more than the last. She felt her strength beginning to falter, her earlier injuries from previous matches making themselves known at exactly the moment she needed her body to hold together, without complaint. She stumbled, caught herself, and barely avoided a strike that would have ended things immediately. It was in that moment of near collapse that she remembered something Draven had told her days earlier, almost in passing, about how the warrior class of the Empire trained for strength and speed above all else, but rarely for patience, believing endurance to be a lesser virtue than raw power. She had nothing left in terms of strength to match him with, but she had spent her entire life learning to survive on less than she needed, to outlast opponents who expected her to break before she ever did. She stopped trying to win the exchange and started trying only to survive it, giving ground deliberately, letting him spend his strength chasing an advantage that never fully materialized, absorbing what she could not avoid, and conserving everything else. Above them, the broadcast reached its final section, Nail's voice steady and clear, even through the chaos, describing the moment 300 years earlier, when the Empire had chosen conquest over the harder, slower work of change, and asking the crowd, directly and without apology, whether they intended to make that same choice again today, in front of everyone watching. The warrior, sensing Kessa's exhaustion, moved in for what he clearly intended as a final strike, committing his full weight and speed to the attack, in a way he had not risked earlier in the match. It was exactly the mistake Kessa had been waiting for. She dropped low at the last possible moment, letting his strike pass over her, and drove herself upward into him with everything she had left, using his own forward momentum against him, the same way she had used it against her very first opponent days earlier. He went down hard, and this time he did not rise again quickly. The arena fell into a silence unlike anything Kessa had heard since arriving, thousands of voices holding their breath at once, waiting to see what would happen next. The overseer stood from his platform above the arena floor, and for a long moment, nobody moved. Kessa stood over her fallen opponent, chest heaving, the three-lined symbol on her shoulder visible to every eye in the stands, the last echoes of Nail's broadcast still hanging in the silence. She had no idea which way this would break, whether the truth had been enough, or whether it had only made her a more visible target for whatever came next. The overseer raised a hand, and the arena fell into a deeper stillness, if that was even possible. When he spoke, his voice carried across the space, through some amplification Kessa did not understand, and Draven's translation device, worn beneath her armor, whispered the words into her ear, just quickly enough for her to follow. For 300 years, this empire has told itself a story about the Calvex, the overseer said, his voice steady, despite whatever risk he was taking by speaking at all. Today, that story has been challenged, in this arena, in front of all of you, by someone who did not even know she carried it until a few short days ago. I will not pretend to know what that means for all of us going forward, but I will not stand here and pretend the truth spoken today did not happen, simply because it is inconvenient to those who prefer the old story to remain unquestioned. He turned his attention directly to Kessa, and though she could not read every nuance of his expression from this distance, she understood the weight of what came next before he even said it. You entered my arena as property, he said. You leave it as something this empire has not seen honored in 300 years. Whatever comes of this, whatever consequences follow for either of us, you have earned the right to stand here as more than a captive, and I will not deny that, in front of everyone who witnessed it. The crowd's reaction, when it finally came, was not a single unified sound. Some voices rose in support, others in clear objection, a fractured response that told Kessa this was far from over, that the Empire would not simply accept this truth overnight, because one match had forced it into the open. But it was a beginning, the first crack in a story that had been sealed shut for 300 years, and standing in the center of that arena, exhausted and bleeding and still very much alive, Kessa understood that a beginning was more than she had any right to expect when she had first woken up in that cold cell with nothing but 2 metal tags left around her neck. Draven met her at the gate as she finally left the arena floor, his expression carrying something she had not seen from him before, a mixture of relief and quiet astonishment. You did not just survive today, he said. You changed something that has stood unquestioned since before either of our families can remember. That is not nothing, Kessa Voss. It's not over, she said, still catching her breath. Whatever happens now, this isn't finished. No, Draven agreed. But you are no longer facing it alone, and no longer facing it as property, with no voice in the outcome. That, at least, has changed for good. That evening, back in the small room that had somehow started to feel less like a cell and more like a place she could breathe in, Kessa sat quietly with the 2 metal tags resting in her open palm, turning them slowly to catch the light. They had traveled further than she ever could have imagined when she first put them on, carrying a promise made 300 years ago by people she would never meet, on a world she had never planned to visit, connecting her to a history she had not known existed until it had very nearly gotten her killed. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, whether the Overseer's rivals would accept this outcome or push back harder than before, whether the Empire itself would begin to reckon honestly with the story it had buried for so long. But she knew, holding those tags in her hand, that whatever came next, she would not be facing it as someone lost and forgotten in a place far from home. She would be facing it as someone who had earned, through nothing but her own refusal to break, the right to matter, in a world that had never intended to give her one at all. Outside her small window, the station hummed quietly around her, carrying her forward into whatever came next, and for the first time since she had woken in that cold cell, Kessa Voss allowed herself, just for a moment, to believe that she might actually find her way through it.